so unimportant for him to make that trip.
How big were your rations?
Very little. It was a loaf of bread for, the day for a family, and a couple of pounds of potatoes a week, and maybe some horse meat if it was available.
Red potatoes, horse meat, not exactly delicious. Yes.
Did you have any friends?
Oh, great question. Did you have friends?
I had friends, but not friends my own age, okay? It was people who lived in the house with us. There was a girl who was about 12 or 13, and there was the girl that was my playmate, and she was like, she was 3 years older than me. So.
Great questions, yeah.
Did they survive it?
Yes, they did. The two of them survived.
About how many children did Miriam actually get out of the ghetto?
I really don't know that count, but there were quite a few. My own family, she got me and 3 of my cousins. I was 4 right there.
She did amazing work. Yes.
How did you first see you got on the tree? When she got on the tree?
Oh, so Suly didn't go to the camp, her mother did. But did your mother talk a little bit about what it was like when they first got there?
Yes, she did. She said that, they didn't know where they were taking them. It's not like they were told, the destination was concentration camps. It was, they got there and they were, pulled out of the train. And then she saw all this mound of shoes. And she said, what is this? Is this a shoe factory? And there were women there that were walking around with eyes very wide open. And they, their hair had been shaved. And so she said, what is this? You didn't know. And then little by little, unfortunately, she was very quickly, she found out.
Yeah. Great questions, yes.
The ice cellar cold.
Oh, the ice cellar. Can you tell us a little bit about the ice cellar? Like what it is? Was it cold down there?
Well,
Work when you were in the ghetto. Did she have a job?
no, my mother was exempt from working because of my father's job.
Yes.
Were there no punishments for execution?
More punishments than you mean other kinds?
Yeah.
Okay, so were there other types of punishments besides, being shot if you did something?
Beatings. Yes.
Say it one more time. So speaking of those beatings, punishments, did that ever happen to either of your parents or anyone that, did you ever see that?
No, I never saw a beating, but it happened to my cousin who lived with us. You see, he was working, would work, and they were taken out of the ghetto to work outside of the ghetto, and there, people traded, whatever you had at home that you would trade for a little food, and he was kind of bringing in the food into the ghetto. They were not allowed, so once he was caught, he was beaten.
Great questions, yeah. Great question. Why were children targeted specifically?
Children were targeted because basically Hitler's idea was to rid the world of a group of people, the Jewish people. And so children who were over 12 years old and were not sick and were not infirm or handicapped were considered that they would be still okay to do slave labor. But anybody under that age was too young for slave labor, and these were the first people, the children and the old people, that he did away with. For other places, I don't know how to answer that question because it was a matter of luck. It was just a matter of luck. They might, once they didn't find anything in the ice cellar, they left. They figured that was the best place to hide. But they did break up walls and floors and everything.
Just didn't happen to find that one.
One place.
Did your parents have tattoos from their
No, my
transportation.
parents didn't have, I didn't know this myself until just a few years ago. The only place that had two numbers was Auschwitz concentration camp, all the others didn't.
So they gave the inmates numbers, but only Auschwitz actually tattooed it onto skin. Usually it was on your, whatever you were given as clothing, there was something that would be sewn on. You had your number on it.
How was your hygiene again?
What was the hygiene like in the ghetto?
Well, let's see, people wash, and, it depended on the people, it wasn't easy to keep hygiene, and some people didn't have running water at all, and it was difficult, but people managed. Of course, there was disease, and, there was a hospital, but they burned that, the Nazis burned that down eventually.
That's a great question. Do you still, are there any long-lasting effects that you still deal with from this time period?
I think so. For example, not very many, luckily for me, because like I always say, how did I survive and survive so well? And it was because I always had somebody around me that loved me. And that made my survival possible. But to give you an example, my late husband and I would go to Florida, and we only had one car, and this was before cell phones. And he would drop me off, and he'd say, I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock. And at 6:05, I would start panicking because of this being stranded, being abandoned. So, yes, it left a little something.
Do you still sometimes just like something might happen? Do you have memories like sort of, you know, on a regular basis? Are there things that remind you of that time or kind of make you think about it?
Nothing.
Very unhappy face with your very large bow.
Well, according, my dad had he said that the reason that I had such a sourpuss face was because I got afraid of the camera. But that was not it. What happened was that my father had taken me to the barber in a little house to get him. And I had beautiful, very long hair that ended up in curls, and they cut that off. And I was very unhappy with my haircut. It was my first bad hair day. So that was why I was so upset.
What was the purpose of the photograph? Why did your father take that?
My father had a photograph taken because with that photograph, he went outside the ghetto and contacted people that by word of mouth he had heard were willing to try to save one of the children, and he would show my picture and say, this is my little girl, and please take her in.
You probably would have preferred you with a smile to maybe.
Yes, but, well, you know, I guess there were a lot of sourpusses at that time. Every day, there was school in the ghetto. Children were taught, and they went through school. I was too little. Yeah, never went back. My dad said, you know, so many of the Lithuanians, not only the Nazis, but so many of the Lithuanians were anti-Semitic. And he said to me, don't go back there. That country is covered without blood. You know, in Lithuania, there were about 125,000 Jewish people living there before Hitler, and only 5% of the population remained.
Keep in contact with Miriam.
I certainly did. I saw Miriam. It took me a long time. I was 6 when I left Miriam to go to Cuba, and I was 20 when I saw her again. And my parents and I, we were in Miami. We had left Cuba, and my parents booked for an airline ticket because Miriam was in New York. And I took a plane and went to New York, and I spent 3 days and 3 nights in a Brooklyn apartment with Miriam, and she filled me in of all the details of the story that I didn't know.
Great question. Like outside of actions or anything else, did people die because of the cold or the conditions?
People died because of illness. There was no medicines. My grandmother died in the ghetto from a you could see, I faced the Hudson River, and you could see the ships going by, and it was very, very beautiful.
What did you?
I worked for an export company, so I used my Spanish. And I started as, doing a little bit of everything and typing, and I ended up owning a little bit of that business at the very end. Weeks. She wasn't very nice, but thinking about it, I mean, she was 18, and there was this little kid, all she did was whine and cry. So I don't blame her. But I would dress myself when I had problems of doing my shoelaces. And she would get irritable with me because I couldn't do my shoelaces. I remember that very well.
How many languages do you speak?
Well, I speak Spanish. I speak Yiddish, which is the language of Eastern European Jews that sounds like German. I can understand German and make myself understood. And Spanish, of course. And maybe I understood it. But
You fell out of chair. I think we're good.
that I understood somehow because when I would see them talking, like whispering to one another, I come over and say, don't send me out today. Maybe tomorrow they'll be there to post at the gate. But I don't know if it was. I understood. I think I knew what was going to happen, but I didn't realize what was going to happen.
Yeah. Because nobody could really,
Yeah, I mean,
can't really imagine.
no, waking up and not knowing it so, was pretty tough.
And they probably also didn't really know what she was going to experience, so it was hard to figure out exactly.
There is one memory, of course, that stands out the most, and it is when I got to Israel, and all my hopes just went down the drain. I was sure my parents were there, and when they weren't there, that stands out every moment of that particular time.
Great question. Yes.
Getting documents to live in a place was very, very difficult, including the United States. So, because we had family in Cuba, okay, my parents were able to go to Cuba, they got documents. It was hard to get that document for me, an entry visa, and finally they did, and I got there. That's why we went to Cuba, we didn't stay in Israel, and we couldn't come to the States because nobody would give us a visa. So that is the reason.
Yeah, so it wasn't like you could just go somewhere and say, okay,
You
I'm here
couldn't
now.
choose, you couldn't choose.
Yeah. It's a very difficult read. Yes.
What was the most important thing that God taught you throughout this whole situation?
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, the most important thing that I learned was when I came to Cuba. When I came to Cuba, I was 6 years old, and I had gone through a lot, even after the war, when there were all kinds of police and military people asking for documents we didn't have, and we were scared, and running borders and whatnot. And then Israel was also at war between the British and the Palestinians and the Jewish people. And so I got to Cuba, and I was, like I said, 6 years old, and my world was distinctly divided in two parts: us Jewish people and the enemy. Now, everybody in Cuba was wonderful to us. We moved to this apartment, I played in the streets. All the neighbors would have little treats and little gifts for me and hugs, and everybody loved me, and I loved everybody, and my parents got along with everybody. I was totally convinced that all of Cuba was Jewish until Christmas came. And then there was a difference. It took me a lot longer to learn that it doesn't matter what is the name of the God that you pray to, but what you have in your heart. And that is the biggest lesson I have learned.
That is a great place for us to stop. We have